Welcome to Toward a More Jewish Jesus, where everything gets better when people get together around a more Jewish Jesus. We operate at the intersection of the Christian and Jewish worlds. And anybody who's lived at that intersection knows that there's sometimes traffic collisions, if I can use that metaphor.
Oh, you're not kidding.
Sometimes there's road rage.
Yeah.
There's people have mixed signals. All that kind of thing happens. As a matter of fact, we're going to be having a newsletter on our website soon called Signals, all about the mixed signals that people get at the intersection of the Christian and Jewish worlds. Because in interfaithfulness, what we are is we're consultants and problem solvers for people at the intersection of the Christian and Jewish worlds. And today I want to talk about an issue that comes up once in a while that could be dismissed as trivial, but it gets downright annoying. And that is, sometimes people in the Christian context are patronizing or critical of Jews who eat kosher or who are concerned about what they eat. As a matter of fact, sometimes Jews are disparaging of that too. I have a good friend who makes a point of eating shrimp and various things like that in order to make a point that, we don't have to do that stuff anymore. Well, is that true? Is it true that Jews eating kosher is a kind of an anachronistic habit that Jews need to get over? And is it true that when Christians, I had experience, I used to be with a music team, and after a concert there would be what we Jews call an oneg, but it's a potluck supper at a church. We did a lot of things for Christian audiences, and almost invariably on the line, getting food at the potluck supper, you'd come to something like a ham sandwich, a salad or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
And some guy would put his hand on your shoulder and say, "Well, Stuart, isn't it great you're not under the law anymore? Yar, har, 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 har." And how do we feel about that?
I've had ham, I confess. It's really not that great. That's
That's a different question. But the question I want to deal with today, in order to equip you to handle these kind of irritating conversations, and maybe it's not just irritating conversations, maybe you have a question. Just last night I was visiting in a very fine church in Inglewood here in Los Angeles, where I happen to know the leader, and I was asked to answer questions in this area, because many Christians have confusion. So whether it's to clear up confusion or to equip you against meddlesome and bothersome conversations, or maybe you're a Jewish person and you wonder if it's a matter of conscience. Let's look a little bit today at this question. Could Peter, Paul, and James, three prominent apostles in the first century, could they eat even a bacon double cheeseburger with good conscience?
No one can eat that with good conscience.
That's a different issue.
That's all right. I've had cardiac surgery, so my cardiac surgeon has totally reformed my entire life.
Yes, but we're not talking about health. We're talking about ritual defilement, about something which is a no-no from God's point of view. Not because of our health, but just because that's the way God has it.
But it does so happen, though, that a kosher diet is much more healthy for you than a standard American diet.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
But that's
not the issue.
That's beside the point.
Right. Okay.
So let's look at this. I'm going to look at three passages. I want you to listen for a moment and see what these passages have in common, because it's really surprising. The first one is from Vayikra, from Leviticus, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll summarize a little bit of it. It begins this way. Chapter 11, verse 1 says, "And the Lord spoke to Moshe and Aaron, and saying to them, Speak to the people of Israel, saying, These are the living things that you may eat among all the animals that are on the earth." And he lists them, and he lists them, and he lists them. And then he lists some that you may not eat. "Nevertheless, among those that chew the cud or part the hoof, you should not eat these. Don't eat the camel, don't eat this, don't eat that, don't eat that, and of course, don't eat pig." And he says, "You should not eat any of their flesh, and you should not touch their carcasses. They are unclean to you." Two very important words at the end of that passage. They're unclean to you. that sounds a little bit like what Paul says in Romans chapter 14, verse 14, when he says this, I know and I'm persuaded in the Lord Yeshua that nothing is unclean in itself, but it is unclean for anyone who thinks it is unclean. Hold that thought. I'm going to ask you to read this next one,
Okay.
Steve. Read this one from Mark chapter 7. And ladies and gentlemen, pay special attention to the end. It's a zinger. Please read, Steve.
And he called the people to him again and said to them, Hear me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going into him can defile him. But the things that come out of a person are what defile him. And when he had entered the house and left the people, his disciples asked him about the parable. And he said to them, Then are you also without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into a person from the outside cannot defile him, since it enters not his heart, but his stomach, and is expelled?
And then there's a parenthetical statement that is added by Mark himself. Oftentimes it's put in parentheses. What's the next little phrase?
Thus he declared all foods clean, although I think that's a,
thus he declared all foods clean. Wait a minute. What are we looking at here? Well, there's a common denominator between these three passages, and some of you who are extremely sharp people, or you wouldn't be listening to Taught a More Jewish Jesus, you've already got that. But for others who may be more challenged, let's look at this. The common denominator, back in Vayikra, back in Leviticus, when God lists the clean animals, then he lists the unclean animals, he says, these are unclean to you, or for you. In other words, he's saying, it's not that these animals are intrinsically, ritually unclean. What makes them to be unclean? The fact that God says, don't eat that. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the midst of the garden, you could say, was unclean to Adam and Eve. There was nothing about the tree that made it unclean but one thing, God's prohibition. And so when we Jews eat kosher, we're only eating that way to show respect for God. God says, don't do that. So we say, yes, sir. Eating kosher is a way of saying yes, sir, to God. It's not about being better than anybody else. It's not even about the food being more healthful.
Although it is.
Although it is. It is about yes, sir. And when Paul says, I'm persuaded that in the Lord that there's nothing that is unclean in itself. There's nothing intrinsically unclean about the thing, about the food. But if it's unclean to you, it's unclean. If you know you shouldn't eat that, it's unclean to you. For you, as a man who went through cardiac surgery, I'm going to change the metaphor to health issues. Mm-hmm. There are certain things that you're not allowed to eat, right?
Long list of everything I used to think I loved, yes.
Right. They're unclean to you.
Oh, very unclean to me.
And if you eat them, you violate your conscience.
Yes, absolutely.
There you go. Now, that's the same.
But I knew they were wrong to eat beforehand and violated my conscience, too. I was bad.
Well, yeah. Well, if I had a conscience, I would violate it often. That's another story. But getting to Mark, this other issue. Now, I want to point out that what heats up this issue is that there's so much misunderstanding, and there's so much smug assumptions that go behind this issue that I'm equipping you to take another thought, to either defend yourself or the issue, or if perhaps you've been on that other side of the issue, I want you to reconsider. This passage with Yeshua where he says that things that go into a man don't defile him because they then pass through into the latrine, as it says in another translation. And then when he interprets the parable to his disciples, he says, do you not see that whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile him, since it enters not his heart, but his stomach, and is expelled? And then this parenthetical editorial statement, thus he declared all foods clean. He was saying that there is nothing intrinsic about food that is unclean. He says, It goes into you, it goes out of you, it doesn't defile your heart. The thing that makes food unclean to you, to Jewish people in terms of kosher laws, the thing that makes them unclean is one thing, God's prohibition. So, now, this issue won't lie down and play dead.
Yeah.
Because I get hit with it all the time. I want to look at another passage with you, and Steve, I'm going to ask you to help me. This is a famous passage where Simon Peter, about 10 years after the resurrection, is going to be the guy who opens up the door of God's family to the Gentiles through faith in Yeshua the Messiah.
I thought that was Paul.
Well, no, Paul actually becomes the chief party in that. But the guy who opens the door is Peter.
Okay.
That's a very good point. And there's a famous story, and we're not going to read all of it because you don't want to sit there in your car or in your home or wherever you are watching and listening to this and listen to us read 28 verses. So we're going to read a little bit. Would you read the beginning of this,
Sure.
please, Steve? It's from Acts chapter 10. And I'd like you to read until the vision and the statement that God makes when Peter has a vision.
All right.
I'll stop you. Go ahead.
At Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion of what was known as the Italian cohort, a devout man who feared God with all his household. He gave alms generously to the people and prayed continually to God.
Now, this alms is tzedakah and tefillah in Jewish terms. He was a God-fearer. He was a Gentile who respected Jewish life, was attracted to it, but had not gone through circumcision and conversion. So he's living to a large degree in the context of Jewish patterns of piety. So he gives alms, he gives tzedakah to the Jewish people. He prays continually to God. You're going to see now he's praying at a time when afternoon prayers are given by the Jewish people because he follows Jewish practice. And then he has a surprise visitor. Please, Steve.
At about the 9th hour of the day, he saw clearly in a vision an angel of God come and say to him, "Cornelius." And he stared at him in terror and said, "What is it, Lord?" And he said to him, "Your prayers and alms have ascended as a memorial before God. And now send men to Joppa and bring one Simon who is called Peter. He is lodging with one Simon a tanner, whose house is by the sea." When the angel who spoke to him had departed, he called two of his servants, a devout soldier from among those who attended him, and having related everything to them, sent them to Joppa.
Okay, so they're off to Joppa. Now, meanwhile, in Joppa, which is modern-day Jaffa, Peter is staying in this house, and he goes up on the rooftop to pray, and something happens. He has another surprise encounter, which is really startling, and this is the one that people throw up to me all the time. Please continue.
Right. The next day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on a housetop about the 6th hour to pray, and he became hungry and wanting something to eat. But while they were preparing it, he fell into a trance and saw the heavens opened and something like a great sheet descending, being let down by its four corners upon the earth. In it were all kinds of animals and reptiles and birds of the air. And there came a voice to him, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat."
All kinds of animals, all kinds of reptiles,
Unkosher.
all kinds of birds, and a voice comes from heaven saying, "Arise, Peter, kill and eat." Whoa! Keep reading.
Okay. But Peter said, "By no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean." And the voice came to him again a second time, "What God has made clean, do not call common." This happened 3 times, and the thing was taken up at once to heaven.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. Then the voice tells him there are a couple of men coming to your door right now. Go down with them. Go where they take you. I have sent them. So Peter has this extraordinary experience, not once, not twice, 3 times, of this sheet lowered down from heaven, all kinds of animals and birds and reptiles. And a voice saying, "Arise, Peter, kill and eat." And then, what God has cleansed don't call common. And he has this happen 3 times. So it takes about 2 days to go from where Peter is in Joppa to Caesarea. And during that whole time, he's with these people who have told him about the centurion who had the angel said to send for Peter. And Peter is trying to figure out what's going on here. He knows that God is up to something, but he has no idea what's happening. When he gets to Cornelius' house, Cornelius has gathered all of his friends and family, a whole bunch of Gentiles. And Peter goes in there. At first, Cornelius bows down to him, because Cornelius comes from a pagan background. He doesn't know that Peter's not an angel. He doesn't know who Peter is. So he bows down to him. Peter picks him up and says, "Look, stand up. I'm just a man like you." And then Peter comes in, and when he addresses the crowd, he says, "You know that where I come from, we don't hang out with Gentiles. We're not supposed to go into a Gentile house and eat with them, etc., etc., because Gentiles are generally idol worshippers." He says, "But God has shown me that I must not call any man common or unclean."
That's interesting, because it's about the food, but the vision about the food is actually a revelation about people associated with the food, not the food itself.
It's not a vision about food at all. The food is only a metaphor.
Right.
The food is a very striking metaphor. Peter, what you used to consider to be out of bounds, not allowable, the rules have changed. But it's not about food. Peter says, "God has shown me that I must not call any person unclean."
Right.
So
no ham sandwich there.
no bacon double cheeseburger.
No,
He's not going to
no.
eat a bacon double cheeseburger. Now, I don't really care what you eat, ladies and gentlemen. You know, I'm not telling you what to eat.
Eat the bacon double cheeseburger. Die young. Go ahead.
No.
I almost did.
I know you did. I'm sorry that was true. But the point is not to tell you what to eat, but there are fair arguments and there are unfair arguments. There's good use of Scripture, there's bad use of Scripture. And many times people can yank your chain and they really have no right. I had this happen just this past week on Facebook, and I'll tell you about that another time. I get my chain yanked all the time. I want to tell you one more story. I think we have time. Now, Peter, you mentioned before that Paul went to the Gentiles. Yes, he did. Paul became the apostle, the emissary, the shaliach to the goyim, to the Gentiles. But he and Peter have a little altercation, a dust-up in Antioch. And it's important to understand what it was about. So I'm reading here from Galatians chapter 2, verse 11 to 13. Steve, you did such a good job with the other one. This one's shorter. Would you read it, please?
But when Cephas came to Antioch,
Cephas is Peter's Aramaic name,
Right.
Cephas.
I opposed him to his face because he was wrong. He had been eating with the Gentiles before certain people came from James. And you have to remember, James was in charge of the church in Jerusalem at the time.
James was in charge of this huge community, hundreds of thousands, no, tens of thousands of Jews who believed in Yeshua. They're all zealous for Torah.
Right.
We're going to find that out if we have time,
Right.
this episode or another one. They're all zealous for Torah, and a group of these people come down from Jerusalem to Antioch, and before they arrived, Peter used to eat with the Gentiles. There was no problem. But when they came down, Peter does something else. Tell us what he does, please.
But when they came, he began to back out and separate himself because he was afraid of the people who promoted circumcision. And the rest of the Jews also joined him in this hypocrisy, so that even Barnabas, who was Paul's disciple,
Paul's partner.
protege, got carried away with them in their hypocrisy.
Okay, so the question is, what's going on here? It's not that Peter used to eat ham sandwiches.
It
with
doesn't
the
say he
Gentiles.
did. No, it's just
It's
that he was
not what
hanging
he
out.
ate. The issue is, who do you eat with? In much of the world to this day, who you eat with is an indication of who you fully accept. And Peter knew that the Gentiles had been accepted by God. He's the guy who opened the door. But when these people from Jerusalem came down, he didn't want to create waves. He didn't want to be misunderstood.
Yeah.
And so he decides, I'll just not eat with the Gentiles while they're here. And Paul nabs him and says, you're not being true to the good news. You're not being true to this. God has made Gentiles entirely ritually clean. And when you separated from them, you communicated the idea that there's something second-rate about them.
Wait. Did God make all Gentiles ritually clean?
Just the women.
Very funny. No, he only made those who believed clean.
It's talking about ritual clean in a religious sense.
Right.
Those who are joined to the community of Israel by
Right.
faith in Messiah.
Right.
So, I guess we have to find time for one more quotation. And again, the reason we're having this discussion is to equip you to keep people from yanking your chain, and also to correct some of you who've made assumptions, which are very common, due to the tradition of supersessionism, where the idea is that the Jewish way of life and the status of the Jewish people expired when Jesus came along. We don't believe that. I taught a more Jewish Jesus. In Acts 21, this is about 14 to 21 years after the day of Pentecost. So it's not the next week, it's not even 5 years later, it's 14 to 21 years later. We read this, Paul and the rest of us went to see James, Yaakov, who was Yeshua's brother and was the big shot in Jerusalem. All the elders were present. After greeting them, we gave him a detailed report of what God had done among the Gentiles through a ministry. Those who heard praised God, and they said to Paul, brother, you see how many thousands of Jews have become believers, and all of them keep the law passionately. All of them in Jerusalem. They didn't treat keeping Torah like nice if it's your style. They all kept it.
It's interesting that he specifically mentions that, because what else would you expect?
Well, a lot of people nowadays expect, hallelujah, Jesus came and now passed the ham sandwiches and the law is now defunct. I know a very famous man who commonly teaches that the law is now rendered inoperative now that Yeshua has come.
So
But
can I kill?
Huh?
So can I kill?
No, because,
Oh.
but you can't kill on the basis of, the Old Testament doesn't tell you can't kill. It's the New Testament that you have to listen to. The Old Testament is dead. He'll say the only one of the 10 Commandments that is not repeated in the New Testament is to keep the Sabbath. Therefore, you keep all of the 10 Commandments, but don't worry about the Sabbath. Obviously, I don't live there. Let's get back to Acts 21. So, James, Yaakov says to Paul, look, there are many thousands of Jews who become believers in Yeshua. All of them keep the Torah passionately. And they've been informed that you're teaching the Jews who live among the Gentiles, that's in the diaspora, out there in the diaspora, in the Galut, you're telling them to reject Moses, that is, reject Torah, tell them not to circumcise their children, 2, nor to live according to our customs. So reject Torah, circumcision, and Jewish life. That's what they've heard. And there are many people today who believe that that's what Paul believed.
Everyone who you find in a Protestant church, and certainly every Catholic.
I wouldn't say that.
Well, okay, 99.999%.
No, you're absolutely wrong. I'll tell you, there are things happening in the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is more progressive about the status of the Jewish people than most Protestant churches. And that's another story. And many Protestant churches are reevaluating attitudes they formerly held and assumed that were true. And I know of things going on you would not believe. I won't tell you that now.
You're right, I don't believe
it. Well, that's all right. So James says, this is what they've heard. You tell them to reject Torah, not to circumcise their children, leave off Jewish customs. So to make a long story short, he says, look, Paul, we've got these 4 guys here, they're under a vow. They're going to go up to the temple and end their period of being under a vow. So go up with them and pay for their sacrifices, so everybody will know that there's no truth about these rumors, but that you yourself walk obedient to Torah. Now, Paul is not a wimp. Paul is not compliant. Paul is not going to do anything to make anybody happy. The next day, he goes up to the temple and pays for the sacrifices in order to demonstrate in everybody's eyesight this guy is still functioning in Jewish life. Paul never abandoned Jewish life. At the end of the book of Acts, when he meets with the elders in the synagogue in Rome, these are not believers in Yeshua. He says to them, brothers, I've never done anything against the customs of our people. Now, was he lying? No, he's telling the truth. What is lying is the assumptions that we've learned to accept, that the Jewish way of life is defunct, that the kosher pattern of living is silly, that it's all abolished. It's not abolished. It is something which is given to the Jewish people, whereby we might say, yes, sir, to God. And it's a good idea to say yes, sir, to God. So here at Interfaithfulness, I want to close it. I've got something here, a little bit of shtick. You know what this is? Anybody from my generation
That's
knows
an
exactly
antique.
what it is. It's an antique, all right. This is a seltzer bottle. And in my home in Brooklyn, New York, in Flatbush, Brooklyn, we got seltzer delivered to our house every week. And those of you who are from that area on the East Coast, you're all smiling, at least from my generation. And we have an expression called 2 cents plain. 2 cents plain is 2 cents plain is what you used to pay for a glass of seltzer, carbonated water. But also putting in my 2 cents means here's my opinion. Okay, here's my opinion. Here at Interfaithfulness, we exist to be problem solvers and consultants for people living at the intersection of the Christian and Jewish worlds. Now, I can tell you how we can help you, but only you can tell us how we can help you. In other words, I have my opinions as to how we can help you, but you know your life on the ground. And we'd love for you to get in touch with us as your consultants and problem solvers at the intersection of the Christian and Jewish worlds. And now we've got a problem, and that is that we've run out of time. So I want you to remember that
Everything gets better when people get together around a more Jewish Jesus.
Shalom. See you next time.
You may support our work at Toward a More Jewish Jesus by sending your tax-deductible contributions to Interfaithfulness, P.O. Box 6137, Altadena, California 91003, 6137. That's Interfaithfulness, P.O. Box 6137, Altadena, California 91003-6137. Please make out your checks to Interfaithfulness. If you prefer donating on the web, please visit us at www.interfaithfulness.org and look for the donate button in the lower right corner of the page. We invite you to follow us too at our Interfaithfulness Facebook page. Thanks for joining us today at Interfaithfulness, where everything changes for the better when we move toward a more Jewish Jesus.